what do you define as a source?
Source is the origin of the music. So, for example, we work with some artists. If I listen to Alice, for example, singing, even if she's singing at the show for us, I know exactly what she sounds like. I know exactly how she expresses a particular word, or how she phrases the things, and what emotions you get. And when you're listening to the record, you want those back.
Live venue is one thing, but it totally depends on the recording engineer and mastering engineer.
Absolutely.
Right?
Every step is important. Even the musician. I mean, they may have a cold when they're singing.
Right.
Or even when they're playing, if they don't feel well, they may not play as well. You know. So that part is their responsibility.
Okay.
You know, I'm not their producer. So they go, they sit down, they play, they decide, okay, this is what we recorded and we're happy with it. So if you're happy with that thing, you give it to the mixing engineer, and then they mix it, and then they say, okay, we're happy with the mix. You give it to the mastering engineer. The mastering engineer does his bit. The better the mix, the less the mastering engineer has to do. But they still can pull things out that you're amazed that you thought the mix was so good, but the mastered product is actually that much more better, that much more intimate. You get to hear things a little bit more clearer, and so on. And then obviously after that depends on where it goes. I mean, it could be used for cutting a lacquer, then goes to metallization, and they produce the stampers, and you get test pressings, for example. If you're happy with the test pressing, they go into proper production and produce the record, and hopefully you're happy with the record. So every step that you do better, it will end up with a finer product at the end. Always.
What you mean by the source would be the final product of whole.
That's one. But from our point of view, the source material is what was used to make that final product. So say, for example, if you have a mastered tape that you're using to cut, or a mastered file that you're using to cut a lacquer, whatever signal that is sent into the lathe, that, as far as I'm concerned, is the source. So the closer we can get to this, the closer we are to what it was fed into the lathe.
So do you get to listen to those kind of source often?
We have been fortunate enough to have some very good friends and relationships with some of the people who are artists, or the mastering engineers, a cutting engineer, and one of the most amazing guys I met in this respect is Miles Schall, who does work a lot at Abbey Road, and he's done almost the entire latest part of the Beatles collection reissues, which were all remixed and redone by Giles Martin, to get the best of what it would have been if, for example, the Beatles were releasing those today, for example. And this kind of relationship, it works a little bit both ways. We have access to listening to things, or sitting in the studio and listening to some of these source materials, but at the same time, they have access to what happens once the thing is being made into a record. How does that sound? How does that work? How far have they improved? For example, Miles has done an incredible amount of work upgrading his lathe. I mean, his lathe does things that even a cut that he did, for example, 6 months ago, and if he does the same cut today, you can easily hear the difference of the changes that have been done, the upgrades that have been done. It's no different to our system. You know, whatever we improve on our record player or cartridge or tonearm or phono stage, it does the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, you hear the end result, go, wow, that's much better.
Vertere recently came up with Calon phono stage.
Yes.
Yeah, in Munich show, and also SG.
SG2 tonearm.
Yeah, SG2
Pathfinder.
tonearm. Yeah,
The
Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Right. What was your purpose to develop these kind of products?
From my point of view, I need an analog source that can recreate that source material as closely as possible. So anytime that there is an idea, it will translate into some improvement or some changes in one of the products. The reference tonearm a few years ago went through Generation 3 update, which brought its performance higher. That meant it was doing less damage, as you may say. But I was still looking for a cartridge for the reference tonearm. I have several very good cartridges by very good manufacturers.
For example?
There are different ones I use. I've used Miyajima Madaki, I've used Hyperion OCL, I've used the Audio Technica R1000, I've got Red Sparrow, for example. So there are different ones I use. But generally speaking, for whatever reason, I tended to look for certain elements by using a certain cartridge. So for example, if I was too critical listening to vocals, maybe I use this cartridge. Or if I was too critical listening to dynamic range, maybe I use this cartridge, and so on. They all did an amazing job. I'm not, you know, they're not cheap. So you know, if you pay money to buy, they have to be good, and they are very, very good. But I was looking for something that tried to combine all the aspects together, which meant life would be a lot easier. So you just listen with one setting. You don't have to keep taking off one item and putting another one, and taking one item, putting another one. And that was really, again, a fortunate position that we have a very good relationship with the people who make the diamonds and cantilevers, and we can specify certain elements in there, and they listen to you. You know, they say, okay, we can do that. You know, so, and they did some changes. They made some parts, and we made a couple of pre-production ones, and I was very, very pleased. So once the extracts came on board, then the next issue that for me was to ensure that our retailers, our distributors can also have access to something that can show them what the source material is actually all about. But the reference tonearm and the reference motor drive are not inexpensive. And you cannot expect every retailer, or the retailers who are interested, or the distributors who are interested, to actually be able to invest in such products. But we had already done the Imperium, which is based on the reference motor drive. So although it's marginally higher than the Tempo, much lower than the reference motor drive, its performance is more geared towards the reference motor drive than towards the Tempo. So it gives you some of the elements that the reference motor drive gives you, and it is impossible to get from a Tempo, for example. I wanted to do the same thing with the tonearm. I like the SG1 HB especially, and I know it's an incredibly capable product, there's no doubt about it. But there were certain things that originally was done on the SG1, the very original SG1, that the what I call the dynamic geometry of the arm was quite different to the reference tonearm. And what I mean by dynamic geometry is the kind of resistance that the arm shows the cartridge when the cartridge is being driven by the groove.
Okay.
So in a way, for example, if you give an analogy, if you're making a car that has got potential to go faster, to have more acceleration, etc., you can't just increase the power of the engine. You need to change the chassis, the geometry of the chassis, so that it can put that power onto ground. Now, if you reverse that, the power that is being put onto the diamond cantilever, if you increase the amount of power that you're putting into it, there's more demand on the tonearm to deal with that. So the center of gravities of things like counterweight, where the bearing point is, where is the center of gravity of the head shell arm tube, for example, where does the anti-skate operate, and so on and so on, become more critical. Whereas if the power in there is not quite as much, it's less critical. It's a little bit different if you have a car that is running, say, on a, I don't know, V6, V8, normally aspirated engine, and then you think, okay, I'm going to double supercharge it. Suddenly you need slightly better suspension, you need slightly better chassis, you need so the same thing applied to the SG2. It looks like the SG1, and that's one of the reasons we kept the super groove too effectively for it. But in reality, it's only got I think 4 items that are common between the two. One is the lift lower device. Is the same cylinder mechanism. The internal wiring that goes through it, which is the HB, which is the best one we make, is the same. There is a bearing cluster of 3 silicon nitride balls that the pivot point goes in. That is the same. Everything else, you cannot fit the SG1 on an SG2 or an SG2 on an SG1. Everything else is different. The counterweight assembly is different, the counterweight part is different, the anti-skating is different. Head shell, even the head shell is scalloped out with a slightly different center of gravity, pulled in one direction than the other, and so on and so forth.
So the name is similar as
because
two different products.
if you look from a distance, you may not be able to tell the difference. But when you look closer, obviously you see the differences. But when you're told that in fact there are only 3-4 components that are common between them, then you realize, okay, that's a completely different tonearm. But if you actually look at this geometry, how the bearing pivot point and the bearing material, for example, on the SG2, we're using a different material for the bearing point because of the, as I said, the power, the momentum transfer from the groove into the cantilever is much higher than you have on the SG1. On the SG1, if you hit the cantilever too hard, the arm will move more. Whereas if the same velocity, same part of the groove hits the same diamond cantilever generator assembly on an SG2, the SG2 will sit more. Imagine a Formula One version of the car, that kind of thing. So once you do that, obviously the bearing point needs to be a little bit harder, the pillar needs to be different material, even the pillar holder, how it holds the whole pillar and things need to be updated in order to be able to handle the extra work that is being given.